there, you're watching Breaking News on NDTV. I'm Maha Siddiqui. India and the United States are taking their strategic partnership to the next milestone. The two countries are now engaged over a range of strategic security and defense issues under the Initiative for Critical and Emerging Technology, or the iCET. India says iCET aims to position the two countries as trusted technology partners. Senior US administration officials have gone ahead and called this an even bigger moment than 2006 civil nuclear deal. But is the underlined message here really only for China? National Security Advisor Ajit Doval ending his Washington, D.C. visit with a meeting with Antony Blinken. The U.S. Secretary of State adding on Twitter that they discussed deepening the strategic partnership between India and the United States. NSA Ajit Doval earlier met his counterpart Jake Sullivan for the first meeting under the Initiative of Critical and Emerging Technologies, or the iCET. The iCET aims to position the two countries as trusted technology partners by building technology value chains. Senior U.S. administration officials say this is even bigger than the landmark 2006 Indo-U.S. civil nuclear deal under Manmohan Singh, which had ended India's pariah status after the Pokhran nuclear tests. Even as both sides were initiating the security initiative, it emerged that discussions are on for a visit by Prime Minister Modi at the invitation of President Biden, possibly in June or July. This assumes much significance as the Prime Minister would be making time for this visit during a hectic year of diplomacy when India is hosting both the SCO summit likely in June and the G20 summit in September.
I'm not going to get into commenting on such media reports. As you're very well aware, and I love saying this multiple times, I don't have a crystal gazing ball. We will announce high-level visit at the appropriate time. At this point, I'm not aware of any specific date or visit. However, as you know, there are visits going on there, and so let me not prejudge anything. I saw some report, but best avoided commenting on such reports.
If this visit materializes, there'll be at least 3 meetings between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and US President Joe Biden in less than 4 months, starting from May, when they'll be meeting at the Quad Summit in Australia, and then the June-July dates that are being looked at for Prime Minister Modi's visit to Washington, D.C. And later that year, in September, President Joe Biden will be traveling to India for the G20 summit. Though China is clearly on the minds of both sides, but senior U.S. administration officials said that it's an effort that is larger than that, the U.S.'s desire to participate in India's rise. The White House says it is to elevate and expand the strategic technology partnership and defense industrial cooperation between the two sides. In New Delhi, Maha Siddiqui for NDTV. So is the new initiative a move to counter China? Let's go straight into our discussion now. I'm joined by Brahma Chelani, Strategic Affairs Expert, Dr. Tara Kartha, former Director, National Security Council Secretariat, Anil Trigunayat, former Indian diplomat, Michael Kugelman, South Asia Institute Director, and Raymond Vickery, former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce. Raymond Vickery, coming first to you. Why is this moment being described by senior U.S. administration officials as perhaps even bigger than 2006?
Well, thanks for having me. This is a very welcome development. This is really, though, a process which has been in train for a long time, going back to when I was Assistant Secretary of Commerce. And then there was a next step in strategic partnership, and then we had the U.S.-India civil nuclear deal, and we've had a defense trade and technology initiative. So while this is welcome, it has to be seen in context of what has gone on before and what needs to be done. And it's not going to be simply an anti-China kind of initiative. If that is the only reason for it, in other words, that the enemy of my enemy is my friend, it's not going to work. It's going to fall short of its promise. But it does mean that the United States and India have strategic interests in common, and now we have to work on cementing the relationship based upon common democratic values and the fight for peace worldwide. And it's not going to be sufficient just to say that the U.S. and India are together versus China. But when it comes to Russia, invasion of Ukraine, when it comes to other matters, that we all go our separate ways. There has to be a common understanding. That doesn't mean that everybody is going to agree on everything, but if it's just an anti-China program, it's not going to work.
All right. Tara Karta, while Raymond Vickery clearly is saying that this is not all right. We'll go across to Tara Karta in just a bit. I think we are trying to fix her audio at the moment. Michael Kugelman, you know, the proximity of India with the United States, if it's not aimed directly at China, as Raymond Vickery is pointing here, is for many other reasons. And this is what the US senior administration officials are also pointing out too. But the proximity between the two countries also makes Russia uncomfortable. Now, how do you think that India is going to do that balancing act? Because Raymond Vickery there said that strategic partners need to at least be on the same page on broader issues. They may not be totally, in agreement on all issues, but broader issues, they need to come together.
Well, yeah, I agree with my friend Ray that indeed this initiative is about broadening the relationship between the U.S. and India to show that they can work on a number of issues beyond pure security and strategic issues. But it's true. I mean, we've heard the messaging from U.S. officials that China is a key consideration at play here. And clearly one thing the U.S. and India want to do is to help India develop and produce defense technologies that enhance its own efforts to produce weaponry at home. And this is clearly meant to strengthen India's capacities to deter China. Though I would also argue, you mentioned Russia, indeed, I think that the U.S. wants to help strengthen India's ability to develop and produce weaponry so that it does not need to depend on Russia as much down the road for the weaponry that it's long depended on from Russia. So, you know, we've seen that India over the years has been able to manage these relationships very well. The fact that it succeeded in maintaining very good relations with Russia and the United States, despite its position on the Russian invasion of Ukraine, I think attests to the fact that it's able to succeed. So, clearly the U.S. is playing a long game, and I think would like to try to convince India that down the road, Russia would no longer be a reliable security partner for India. And this iCET initiative is one way to do that, to try to help India be in a better position to not have to rely on Russia as much down the road. But I'm confident that India would be able to play this balancing act just because it's been able to do so over the last year. And it's probably the most difficult challenge it's faced in quite some time in being strategically autonomous, as it were, to manage its relations with both the U.S. and Russia.
Anil Gunath, taking off from what Michael Kugelman just pointed out about the effort to also develop a greater defense cooperation relationship with India, that effort has been on for some time from the US side. But under iCET, what we are seeing is specifically defense industrial cooperation that is being spoken about. Do you think that that is more in keeping Russia in mind at the moment as far as the US is concerned rather than China solely?
Well, as far as I think, India does not have this alliance mindset, which is often our Western partners like to think in terms of. So that's not very much there. India is still, despite everything, believes in its strategic autonomy, and through strategic autonomy wishes to serve the interests of its strategic partners. So what we are looking at is that you are having different choices for different things. Simply because you sign an agreement does not become that you become hostage to your choices in the foreign policy. That is not the case, and US establishment fully understands it. Because Prime Minister Modi has spoken to President Biden, our foreign minister has very clearly spoken to his counterpart Blinken. Jake Sullivan and N.S. Doval would have spoken about this. At the same time, everybody knows that if India has to move to the next orbit, it does require latest technologies. Now, if you go by the US strategy, as far as the defense or Pentagon strategies are concerned, China is their very major concern. And India is also no great friend of China. We are facing problems with them. So definitely there is some kind of synchronization that is possible as far as technology upgradation, defense industrial coordination. And besides, one must also not forget that India also stands on its own. Even economically, it is emerging, it is growing very fast. In terms of I would say the population wise or its human resource dividend is going to be enormous. It's going to be a huge market for the America. So the USA looks at it in a multifaceted manner, and India has always worked with both the sides, as Michael also mentioned. So I think that we are not going to have any problem. And as far as defense procurements from Russia is concerned, so if you go by the CIPRI reports, so from 70%, it has already come down to 43%. And the USA has emerged our major defense and security partner. Now, how do we harness a couple of things in this whole iCET business? Is that number one is that how are we going to get through the regulatory restrictions, which are very much the part of it in the United States, because transferring technology is never so easy, as the people who negotiate with the Americans very well will tell you. And secondly, how are we going to synchronize the America First and Make in India? These are the two things. We are able to do that. I think it's a win-win proposition, and the US and India both will get their objectives out of it.
Right. I think regulatory barriers is something that has found mention there in the conversation between the two sides under iCET. Brahmachalani, you know, from the vast ambit of iCET that one can read from the fact sheet that has been put out by the White House, it goes from critical technology to semiconductors to defense industrial cooperation. I mean, sometimes it's even hard to understand how this large ambit will be taken care of under this one initiative. But are these all linked together when it comes specifically to Indo-Pacific and countering China?
Well, the expanding US-India strategic partnership has become pivotal to equilibrium in the Indo-Pacific. And with India's closer integration, the four-nation Quad is blossoming as a strategic coalition of the leading Indo-Pacific democracies. But we should not forget one thing, that translating the promise of the US-India initiative on critical and emerging technologies into reality will not be easy, given the long-standing US hesitation to share advanced defense and computing technology with India. Take, for example, the GE jointly producing jet engines in India. That issue has been hanging for the past 2 decades. Now the GE has made a fresh proposal to Washington to jointly produce jet engines in India. And Biden, as a senator, had spearheaded a congressional sanctions move in 1992 that helped block Russia's sale of cryogenic engine technology for India's civilian space program, setting it back many years. But of course, now things have changed fundamentally. There is a new realization in Washington about the importance of building a closer partnership with India. And given the fact that Russia and China are getting closer together, US policy, instead of driving a wedge between China and Russia are not natural allies, they are natural competitors, but US policy has helped turn the two into close strategic partners. And as a result of this deepening entente between Russia and China, India is gaining greater salience in US policy. And if the US is not to accelerate its relative decline through strategic overreach, it needs India more than ever. So there are certain strategic factors that are at play, which as a result of that, we are seeing this US-India initiative on critical and emerging technologies. But translating its promise into practice will be the real test of this initiative.
Also, you know, has Tara Kartha much changed over a period of time? As Brahmachalani is pointing out, there was a period when there was a lot of resistance from the US as far as, you know, any effort towards defense cooperation perhaps or technology transfer was concerned. But of late, you know, we've also seen in the S-400 deal with Russia, the CAATSA waiver that India was looking at, that seems to be going in the direction perhaps which India would have liked, even though Turkey did not get a waiver despite being a NATO ally. Is all this yet again giving us a sense that China is topmost priority at the moment for the US to counter in Indo-Pacific, and that is why this kind of can I say, leeway being given to India?
No, I think, things have changed drastically, right? From the time Brahma was talking about. I mean, that was a different sort of era that we were looking at. Now it's different, not just in terms of China, but also the fact that in the next few years, the whole globally, there is an economic crunch. I mean, there's a acceptance in the US also that they can't do things alone. Matters have changed. They need other countries on board, and they've said as much. And here is this huge pool of talent which is in India, which can be tapped at any time. I mean, there is a massive amount of talent available. The second point which you were talking of in terms of whether this will go forward or not, my hope is, I mean, this is how I see it. I know that the National Security Council Secretariat is a very key, what shall I say, it's a body which can bring together different ministries onto the same table. It's a key coordinating body. And it's the advantage is it's right at the very top. So much of the problems we have in terms of, getting this kind of technology, getting this kind of cooperation forward, a lot of it is within ourselves also. It's also US bureaucracy. I mean, you've seen the DTE, the Defense Technology and Trade Initiative, the problems you had because we are looking at technology and the US is looking at trade and the laws which govern each are different. So in this, I'm hoping since the NSCS is on board, there will be a lot more coordination and movement very quickly across government. That is what we need.
All right. Raymond Vickery, also, it has been constantly mentioned that the initiative iCET is being done because it's coming directly, the message from the top two leaders, from Prime Minister Modi and President Joe Biden. Does that mean, as Tara Karta is saying, that this will be pushed forward? Also, I want your comments on the fact that we are now hearing that Prime Minister Modi has been invited by President Biden around June, July. They're trying to work the dates out. Now, we'll be seeing the two coming together at different platforms in a span of 3 months, more than 3 times perhaps. The Quad Summit in Australia, then we'll have the Prime Minister perhaps traveling to the US, Joe Biden traveling to India for G20, and also perhaps G7 in Hiroshima. Is it unusual, this kind of coming together so many times?
Well, it's certainly unusual for the United States and India, who, as you know, were estranged democracies for so very long. But it is indicative of what's been happening since the Clinton administration through Bush, Obama, and even Trump. And that is that there is a widespread understanding in the United States power establishment, both in the executive branch and the legislative branch, that India and the U.S. have a lot in common. Now, there's no question that both President Biden and Prime Minister Modi have a very good personal relationship, and they want to see this go forward. But they also realize that in a democracy, it's not enough just for the two people at the top to be in favor of something. In the United States, we have to bring the Congress along. This latest initiative is not going to work without changes in law and in regulation, which will do it. It's all really, though, a matter of building trust. Without that trust on wider values of democracy, of global interest, of peace, of the need to contain China, the need to promote the rule of law, this will not go forward. So yes, it's true that we have an absolutely wonderful time, and India is positioned as head of G20, as the head of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization for this year, for its position in the Quad to play a major role, and the United States is moving forward to take advantage of that opportunity.
It's interesting that you mentioned SCO because Michael Kugelman, coming to you now, the timing of the Prime Minister's visit perhaps to the United States is also interesting. This will be perhaps just shortly after India hosts the SCO summit, for which China and Russia are expected here in India.
Right, absolutely. The timing is notable. But, I would say that the pressure is really on now for the two sides to make this iCET work. And indeed, as you've noted, there's going to be a number of meetings between Biden and Modi, and especially if the Prime Minister comes on a state visit, there's going to be a lot of pressure for this initiative to progress enough that, the two of them could break news about something big. Also, both the U.S. and India have elections in 2024. And, I think that we get to a certain point in 2023, both countries are going to go into election mode, both governments will go into election mode, and that could close off opportunities to make this issue a priority. So I think that there's a relatively limited window, and hopefully we'll see momentum in the next 3 to 6 months before both countries start focusing on other things. And indeed, the bureaucracy will be the big obstacle with this initiative, and hopefully the two sides will be able to get around that somehow. But great opportunities with these meetings between the two leaders, but also a lot of pressure and expectations for something big to come with this new initiative soon.
Brahmachalani, much is being said about the bureaucracy, the hurdles that could be created, the Congress over here, the role that it could play as well. But do you think that now there is, as far as the issue of China is concerned, better understanding in the US? Because as I mentioned, the CATSA waiver, again, a Russian technology to India, that being, in some sense being allowed by the US Congress because the argument of China was put forth, wasn't it?
Yeah, but the S-400 system was negotiated before CATSA was passed by the US Congress. And even the so-called sanctions against Turkey for buying a similar system from Russia, what impact did those sanctions have? The relationship between US and Turkey is pretty cordial. The so-called punitive measures against Turkey were hardly punitive. So there is an understanding in Washington that if a country like India is buying the S-400 system, it's buying it to protect itself against the Chinese threat. The S-400 is critical for India's security vis-a-vis China. But coming back to your question on bureaucracy, of course there are bureaucracies in both Washington and New Delhi. They have in the past been a hurdle to close the ties. But there's also a more fundamental issue about U.S. regulatory hurdles to the transfer of advanced defense and computing technology. Those hurdles will have to be removed for this new initiative to succeed. But it's important to note one thing, that the U.S.-India relationship thrived during the Trump presidency. But President Biden has sustained the momentum in the growth of the bilateral relationship with India. And most importantly, Biden's interactions with Modi have been characterized by ease and warmth. So there is a good personal chemistry between Biden and Modi, which is very important in a relationship between two important powers.
All right.
And the series of meetings that Biden will have with Modi this year those meetings should be able to help sustain the momentum and also translate that momentum into concrete results. So this year may bring about some important developments that help cement the US-India partnership.
All right. I have the last 2 minutes left. Anil Trigunayat, I'll request you to take 1 minute and answer the question about how you expect China to respond to this iCET.
Well, China has already, the comments have come out, they have called it some kind of a friend shoring, same bad, different dreams. Those kind of comments are already coming from China. But China is, knows very seriously and sincerely that this is against them. Anything that happens, and the technology quest for India is of supreme importance at the moment. We have always worked on TOT, transfer of technology, with different countries and partners. It has not succeeded with the USA, it did succeed with Russia and some other countries. So we will continue to work on this, and China will continue to be mipped, but at the same time, there is no complacency, because China is going in a very fast and high gear as far as technology supremacy race is concerned.
Tarakarta, a similar question to you. Not just immediate statements, but how do you see China are perhaps reacting to this situation, because the LAC friction in Eastern Ladakh continues?
Oh, they're not going to like this at all. I mean, anything that we do with the US is something which they take umbrage with. But then, the problem really is that, China is 40%, I think about 40% of the world's patents are filed by China. What is our R&D budget? 0.7% of GDP. So there's a lot of things that we have to do. We have to put our own house in order, before we get going on this. We're talking of US regulations. You need to get the climate in your own country up and running, and very quickly, because there is very little R&D within our own private sector. So there's a lot more which if you want to catch up with China, you have to reform your sector from within.
All right. So apart from the partnerships that are being created, of course, reform from within, as Tara Karta is pointing out, also necessary. Many thanks to all of you for joining us here on the discussion this evening. That's all that we have time for. Taking a very quick break now. News and updates will continue. Stay with us.